Good day, everyone. I'm Barsha Karki, Solutions Engineer at NetApp in Sydney, Australia. I welcome you to our session today on Ready, Set, Drive Real Value from AI. I would like to start with an acknowledgement of country. I'm speaking from the land of Bilingual people, and I would like to pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. A bit of context in relation to our conversation today. Businesses across nearly every industry are adopting AI to stay competitive, drive growth, and decrease expenses. Whether to power self driving vehicles, genomic medicine, chatbots, or predictive maintenance, the success of AI is completely dependent on access to large amounts of data that can be used to identify patterns, develop predictive insights, and enable increasingly accurate autonomous systems. In this roundtable, you'll hear from a very diverse set of speakers and panelists of experts and technologists from the broader community. While AI discussions are relevant in all parts of the world as we see more use cases every day, in today's session, we'll focus on developments and challenges in AI in the Asia Pacific region and look specifically into financial services, automotive, and healthcare. It will be an interesting conversation on how businesses are managing data to drive real value from AI. With that prelude to our discussion, I would like to introduce you to our keynote speakers, Nirvana Farhadi, a recognized global influencer in regulatory technology sector, and Hoseb D, NetApp Head of AI and Data Analytics. Following the keynote, I'll be moderating a panel discussion. In the panel today, we have Rima Alameddin, Vice President, Enterprise Sales at NVIDIA, Dan Frith, Head of Technology at Digital Sense, and Adrian DeLuca, Head of Partner Solution Architecture, Global ISV Build Programs at Amazon Web Services. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first key speaker, Nirvana Farhadi. Over to you, Nirvana.
My phone was ringing in the other room today, and as I bolted down the corridor trying not to break my neck, I remembered I can actually answer the call on my watch. I started to think about how far tech has come. It's absolutely incredible. Who would have thought that when I watched Back to the Future as a kid and Marty McFly spoke into the watch on his wrist, that one day I'd be doing exactly the same thing with my Apple Watch? We've got smartphones, wearable devices, autonomous cars, 3D printing, holograms, virtual reality, drones, video calls. The feats tech has achieved is amazing, isn't it? We're in the midst of the fourth industrial revolution, with technology leading the way. The massive advances of the last several decades give us a preview into a future previously reserved for science fiction and dreamers. The dreams of yesterday's science fiction have become today's reality, and as it turns out, the connection of sci-fi to tech is far from coincidental. Many R&D labs find a lot of their inspiration in the books, TV shows, and movies that have imagined the future, and their research feeds a lot of the tech we have today. One of the major enablers of these types of innovations is, you guessed it, artificial intelligence and machine learning. But what exactly is AI? There's so many romanticized notions of the tech out there, making us think of intelligence equal or greater than our own. We hear things like deep AI, and in movies, when something goes wrong, usually it's because the Skynet type AI has gone rogue and decided to disobey humans. The AI of today isn't nearly as smart as that yet and has the approximate computing power of an earthworm. Also, data in isolation still needs a human touch to make decisions. The solution lies in combining the power of AI and machine learning with the subtle ingenuity of human problem solving. So the human intellectual capital never goes away. So, simply put, most of the AI we have today is just complex decision engines designed to do things humans were doing before. In order for AI to work, you need data and access to large amounts of it. For things like pattern recognition, developing predictive insights, and enabling accurate autonomous systems. And remember, if you put garbage in, you're going to get garbage out. So you need good, accurate data for successful AI business tools. And up until recently, the data wasn't available. And if it was, computers couldn't have handled it anyway. The pace of AI advancement continues to leap forward in financial services. AI and ML are the frontline fighters in the war against money laundering, fraud detection, and cybersecurity. In healthcare, AI is already delivering essential business tools like solutions that deliver accurate cancer diagnosis, intelligent system checkers, deep learning platforms that provide actionable insights, and platforms to analyze unstructured medical data like radiology images, blood tests, EKGs, genomics, patient medical history, etc. In the auto industry, AI and self-driving cars go hand in hand. So if you're lucky enough to have a new car that's parallel parking itself, then you've got a car that's using AI. And not only is massive headway being made with autonomous vehicles, but also in manufacturing. The sheer demand for cars is making manufacturers look for machinery and ways to enhance production. So this disruptive tech is not only changing the cars on the road, but the factories that build them. Every day, we see huge investments in new tech development and AI. Why? Because there are huge advantages and benefits in leveraging it as a business tool. So, the burning question is, how can we leverage it to drive real business value? The correct application of AI can deliver incredible accuracy with as much as 100% shown in some medical trials. Today's AI can now automate everyday tasks, process and analyze huge amounts of data, help with management decisions, chat to customers to resolve customer service issues, create algorithms to forecast growth, predict financial trends, pull analysis for rolling out a new product, and AI is a productivity superpower. In financial services, it's being heavily used to meet the demands of customers who want smarter, safer, and more convenient ways to access, invest, spend, and save their money. Also, AI-enabled reg tech solutions allow firms to meet their compliance and regulatory obligations whilst reducing costs and resource burdens. Decision-making becomes easier because machines aren't clouded by emotions and tasks that are done much faster and at a fraction of the cost of human labor. Now, here's a showstopper for you. Wait for it. Are you ready? Some firms are even putting an AI on their board of directors because it can pick up on the market trends humans can't see and make decisions faster and more objectively. How sci-fi is that? Boggles the mind, right? Incorporating AI into the workplace is like having your own personal army of robotic assistants who streamline and automate almost any process, leaving you free to focus on big picture strategy. Now, COVID has had a devastating impact on our world in the past year. And when faced with the reality of everything being remote from work, entertainment, education, to connecting with friends and family and more, technologies like AI have offered solutions to continue some semblance of normality in both business and life. As a result, we've seen decades worth of digital transformation taking place in the past year alone out of sheer necessity, with the main enabler being AI. All this is brilliant, and as AI is becoming more accessible, it's no longer in the exclusive realm of the data scientists, CTOs, and the CIOs. So now the wider business is able to benefit from it. But implementing this technological badass tool comes with its own set of challenges, like security and privacy. To be effective, AI needs access to lots of info, which means it could be pulling or sharing your employee and customer data without you even knowing it. And so far, no one is stepping up to regulate what it can and can't see and use. Data availability and quality is one of the biggest challenges for organizations. Lack of good data, data silos, legacy systems, inadequate governance procedures are so common. Not having data availability for development and testing of AI can be detrimental. Business use cases are challenges too. There's so many AI solutions for business problems, but firms find it hard to prioritize or select the most important problem to get started with and see the return on investment. Budget constraints are another factor. Not all businesses have the resources to invest in AI models, as the tech and expertise can be very expensive. AI model interpretability leads to major risks too. To be compliant and avoid fines, firms have to explain their AI models in depth to regulators. But perhaps the biggest challenge to AI adoption is the regulatory implications. In healthcare, getting high quality clinical data sets is like finding the Holy Grail. Medical data has strictly limited access due to its highly regulated nature. Even sharing data between databases requires HIPAA and FDA compliance in the US. So having access to a ready-to-go database that has the precise data you need is nigh on impossible, especially when you're dealing with rare diseases. AI's impact on our lives is tremendous, but it can and is being manipulated. The global pandemic has exposed widespread vulnerabilities everywhere. We see this example in financial services as compliance teams scramble to manage and monitor remote employees spread across the world. Regulators and governments are tightening restrictions, and the tech has to run at breakneck speed to keep pace with the increasingly sophisticated cyber criminals. 2021 has the potential to be a defining year for AI in the fight against global crime, fraud detection, and security breaches. But there is another side to the utopian promise of a world made faster and more connected by tech, and that's the insidious invasion of our rights and our privacy. For all its promise, the current and future tech advances will be vulnerable to manipulation and will continue to confront the cold, harsh reality of regulation, standing guard at the very boundary this innovation inherently pushes against. The question is, how should AI be regulated? We have to have improved regulatory oversight that serves as a kind of filter to protect, enhance, support the privacy and well-being of the. Listen, AI is not a conscious being and it can't form opinions. It acts based on the data available. We have to be prepared to work with AI, but it's not the omnipotent super being AI of science fiction. What we have available today is a tool that can enhance human intelligence and empower better decision making, not replace it. So if there's anything you've taken away from anything I've said tonight at all, let it be this. AI implementation is emerging as a key priority for business. We have to be prepared to invest time, money, and effort to develop and harness AI. Active use of AI means getting to grips with real-world data and AI, so we must build a bridge between human and machine. The ethical deployment of AI is a growing concern for regulators, but the ecosystem as a whole. How do we find the maximum efficacy of AI's impact whilst ensuring a fair playing ground for everybody? How do we protect the consumer without stifling creativity? And the question I'll leave you with this is, how will you use today's AI for your productivity superpower? And with that, I'm going to hand back to Barsha.
Thank you, Nirvana. That was a fantastic keynote to kick off our session. It is intriguing indeed that science fiction movies we saw less than a few decades ago are now becoming real. And what is even more fascinating is that this new reality is accessible to not just a select few anymore. I love that Nirvana finished off with the question, how will you use AI to enhance your productivity superpower? Rest assured, we will be exploring this further in our panel discussion. I would like to now invite Hoseb D, NetApp Head of AI and Data Analytics, for his keynote. Over to you, Hoseb.
Thank you, Barsha. Well, while you're thinking about Nirvana's great talk and great question that she left you with, I'm going to cover in the next few minutes the main three challenges. And, I want to speak about the challenges. It's not doomsday, but I think everyone now doing AI coming to us saying, the everything is great, but how can you help us with, or what is the specific things that NetApp specifically is helping AI adopters in? And those three major things are all related to data. So the first is the data availability that Nirvana already tapped into a little bit. The second is the collaboration and reproducibility among the different data scientists. And the last and not the least is the hybrid AI development that is going on. And we have cloud partners here on the call today, so we can chime in later on if I'm saying something wrong here. But I think for the first part, before we start the challenges, let me tell you that we talk to customers probably on a daily basis. What we are seeing, and this has been also told by different analysts in the market, is that 50% of the AI projects are not progressing beyond their POC stage, right? And there are multiple reasons for that, not only related to data. It has to be with the models, it has to be with the different aspects of the data science, et cetera, et cetera. But let's focus on the data related ones, right? So first off, let me give you an example of a customer who was in the retail, who came to us. They have 500 data scientists in-house. One of the biggest challenges that they were having was the data being available to those 500 data scientists without the need to copy the data that 500 times, as you can imagine, right? So if you're dealing with image data, that will cost you a lot of time, a lot of capacity to just enable those data scientists to do their work. So what we have done is actually, by using NetApp's technology, we have enabled those 500 data scientists to share that data without the fight between who that data belongs to, without the fight of where that data stays, in which department, goes out of which department, without the fear of losing the data. So that's one aspect of the data being available, and available to wherever the data scientists exist, and regardless of their department. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect is all related about reproducibility and collaboration. And that has been a big topic in the AI industry. Let me give you an example. Again, one of our automotive customers. It is highly regulated industry where if you're gonna put autonomous driving cars into the street, they have to be recorded on what type of models these guys have been trained on, because if there's an accident, God forbid, they have to go back. There's no human being running that car, so they have to check, on which models that car was built on, what data was used to train those models. So historically, it is, in a simple data science language, it is called machine learning versioning or code versioning. So what we have done is in NetApp is we hired a couple of data scientists and we put them to learn the NetApp story and the NetApp technology. And then they came up and said, well, you guys have a lot of great things that data scientists can benefit from. And we asked them what would be the top thing. And they said, we can easily version the code along with the data. And the simplest question to those guys were like, okay, so how were you guys doing in your previous life? They said, well, we used to version it manually. And let me tell you, when we took this story and we went out and started speaking to the customers, one of them was last week, they are all agreeing that this has been a major challenge for their teams of keeping trace to the data that was trained a year ago, a month ago, 2 months ago. They all want to reproduce the models. They want to create the same performance that they had with the models a year ago, and they are all at the mercy of someone not tampering with this data. So what we have started doing is we started telling them, okay, we can help you now, as we did in that automotive customer, to version your code along with the data. So we created an integrated solution with the native data science tools. And the other hurdle is no one from the data science teams wants to learn how storage operates, right? So we don't want to create another problem by fixing the problem. So what we did is we exposed all the great tools that we have all the way up from the GPUs with our collaboration with NVIDIA. We merged it with the GPUs and we went all the way up into the data science level, where now data scientists at that specific customers, with one click, they can version the code along with the data. We applied this in another healthcare customer as well, and it has been working perfectly for them. And what that allowed them to do is now they reduced the time from 20 hours into 20 seconds from the copying the data, versioning the data, keeping it in a different place, keeping it on a USB drive. We've seen that a lot too, guys. We all talk about the beauty of AI, but we have seen people restoring their data on hard flash drives. So we don't want all of that. That all creates impedance, that all creates barriers to entry of AI projects. Now, last but not least, I want to touch is on the hybrid cloud, right? We know that 90+% of customers starting their AI journey in the cloud, they all think it's going to be $1 billion investment if they go on premises. So they start their AI journey in the cloud. They want to test it. They want to try it. They want to go into a POC phase. They want to see the ROI. So what is happening? Believe it or not, a lot of these people, when they start reaching into a scale, they're saying, I have a lot of data on premises. I'm not willing to move that onto the cloud. So what can we do here is like, I like the cloud tools. I want to do some of the development in the cloud, but what we can do rest. And that's where, again, the technology of bringing the data fabric between the multiple cloud providers and on-premises is creating that holistic view of the AI and the data pipeline merged together, so that now customers, like we had in a big pharmaceutical, where they were 100% in the cloud, but then they realized the cost, the performance, and then the data existent required them to build that data fabric. So now we are doing both on premises and in the cloud. And last but not least, before we're moving on to you, Barsha, I think, people think that NetApp has been in the storage industry. So for everyone in the APAC region, we are solving the data logistics issues that is related to AI projects, right? Don't think of us I'm not going to bring NetApp because I don't want to spend millions of dollars. With our cloud tools now, with our integrated solutions with NVIDIA, with our integrated solutions with the data science toolkit, we are bringing multiple different, and I didn't mention, right? I want to be a specialist. I'm not fixing everything in the world. I'm not fixing all the challenges that Nirvana mentioned in AI, but I can fix the data challenges that you guys are having to help you move one step further probably in your AI journey. So with that, I want to hand it over to you, Barsha, and thank you.
Thank you, Hoseb. A few key points that I took away with that, there are options for players who want to develop their own solutions, and also for those who are eager to use AI and are happy to use available tools rather than build their own solutions. That the focus needs to be placed on fixing the data as the first step, even before we go on fixing a model. And also that AI implementation is through collaboration of technology and tools that are available, and hybrid multi-cloud environment. So thank you for that. Thank you both, Nirvana and Hoseb. The keynotes were absolutely insightful. Now let's continue and expand this session with a panel discussion. First question to the panel. After those two very strong keynote presenters, maybe I'll start with Rima, you first. Could you give your perspective on the two keynotes and your takeaways from that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. They were very powerful keynotes. Thank you, Nirvana and Hoseb. I couldn't agree more with your perspectives. I'm going to comment on something Hoseb just mentioned. Hoseb, you're absolutely right. Gartner quotes that in actually their most recent report and their 2020 report, they state that on average it takes organizations 9 months to take a model from prototype to production, and less than half of them actually make it to production. And, when you think about that stat, it really doesn't tell the full story, since data science is not like software engineering. It is more like research. It's experimental and iterative. And so it's okay that models not all models make it into production. As long as we're learning from our experiments, that's really what's important, because the whole purpose of data science is experimenting, learning, and then moving the important models to production so that they can drive business value and real outcomes for the business. So totally agree with you. I just want to tell our audience it's okay, because it's experimental and because it's a learning model and it's iterative. It's okay that that's what's happening. And even when these models make it to production, you need to continue to monitor them and to continue to update them so that they continue to be delivering the right results for your business.
You can't just
Thanks,
not
Rima.
love Rima's positivity, I guess. Thank you, Rima.
Thank you.
Great key takeaway point, Rima. Maybe I'll look at Adrian now. Perhaps your takeaway, Adrian.
Yeah, well, first of all, Nirvana had me at Back to the Future. I'm a child of the 80s, so I brought right
Me
back.
too. Well, no, I'm a bit older. I'm not going to give my age away.
Let's not do that. But even, Hoseb and talking about autonomous cars, I always wanted a DeLorean. But, I ended up becoming an engineer. And as an engineer, I'm really passionate about how do you build all this stuff? This science fiction that we were watching 30 years ago, how would it actually be built? And I've been very lucky, obviously, to learn a lot about that. And, it started with exactly what Hoseb said. The foundation for all of this artificial intelligence is storage, right? Turns out that artificial intelligence and machine learning is continually hungry for it. And the need to be able to not only scale it, but make sure that it's durable and performant is so important. So some of those technologies, certainly that NetApp brings to the table, makes it really, really easy. Now, something that I've certainly observed in my time is a lot of companies build single-purpose silos, right? They use it for analytics purposes. And when we think about all these different silos and data warehouses and object repositories that we've built over the years, it becomes very, very difficult to wrangle when we're talking about artificial intelligence increasing in use. And, there's another big trend that we see around the fact that data isn't just relational. It's not sitting in a database anymore. It's increasingly schemaless. We see documents, for example, or now we start to see a lot of relational entities in graph databases. And of course, think about clickstream data or those, sensors that sit in those autonomous cars. It's streaming and it's real time. So we're contending with a lot more different structures to be able to bring all of these sorts of things in. Now, of course, in years gone by, we try and wrangle all this stuff together and use things like ETL or extract, translate, and load, which again becomes really costly and inefficient. And you think about all the productivity that a company needs to invest in just the data preparation. And I like to really think about it in terms of a layer of a cake. So if you think about the data scientists, they're practitioners. What they want to be able to do is build algorithms. They want to be able to tune them and train them for all those different use cases. They like using things like Jupyter notebooks, right? That allows them to do those testing of those algorithms. They like to use different machine learning frameworks. There's all sorts of funky names out there like TensorFlow and MXNet and PyTorch and Caffe, and the list goes on. And the fact is that's only increasing. The number of different frameworks is increasing because the use cases are also increasing, and they're all different, optimized for, different use cases.
Well, thank you, Adrian. Over to you, Dan. Tell us your key takeaway points from the keynotes.
Yeah, so both great keynotes. I think the key takeaway for me was that, as someone who deals with infrastructure on a daily basis, AI has become so much more accessible in the last 5 years. It's no longer that infrastructure challenge. How do I put the cake together? The recipe's there in terms of the advancements we've made in technology, in terms of the boring tin in the data center. We've got that sort of nailed. So now we can really focus on the outcomes for the business, and that's, I think that, to Rima's point, that's the most interesting part about this, is actually understanding the strategy moving forward. It's not a tactical initiative in most enterprises. It's really about getting more value longer term for the business through this kind of activity, which is really cool.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Dan. I guess that leads me to the next question. Does it make sense to all businesses?
So I think it really comes down to, like most things in business, it's understanding what your strategy is, what the business is you're actually trying to do, and then understanding how the best way to get there is. So just like, the way you would approach big data, the way you'd approach, cloud adoption, any kind of activity within the business, whether it's IT or non-IT related, that's what's really important, is understanding what that outcome is you're trying to achieve. AI, not to put too fine a point on it, is a function of is basically a tool to get you somewhere and get you some outcomes and get you some enhanced value for your business, so you can do your business better, because that's what we want to do. But I don't know that necessarily it's not the hammer that looking for a nail, so to speak. It's everything. Business needs to understand what its business is before it can do business, is kind of the point.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I mean, that's what's so important, is starting with the business problem and not just saying, okay, I have this data, let me see what I could do with it. Totally agree with you.
I think one suggestion that Yeah, one suggestion we always do, Barsha, to customers is don't shoehorn AI into everything. It won't, there are specific use cases, and you don't have to do AI to be a modern data, or you can do multiple different things, right? So don't force it, because there are things, as Dan mentioned, will be applied, and there are things you're just going to spend money so that you just say, I'm doing AI, right?
Yeah. So Hoseb, just to add to what you were saying, one trend that we're seeing is that enterprises are looking to have people who are bilingual, sort of bilingual, knowing a domain and knowing data science, because then they can really understand what workflows or what areas it would be helpful to apply data science towards, and what it doesn't, some areas it's important to apply data science on, and some areas it doesn't. But you can only know that if you know your domain and you know data science. So you make a really great point. And once you have those two and you're bilingual, then you can really leverage your expertise and apply data science in the right places.
This is something that we continually see as customers are starting to embark on using technology that's actually been around for some time. If you think about natural language processing, right, being able to turn text into speech and speech into text. I don't know how many Alexas I've got in my house, but there's a lot. But I can tell you, they're not necessarily talking to me in the context of what I like doing there in drumming or playing tennis or all the different things that I like to do. And being able to bring those two worlds together makes a big difference. And we see this a lot. I know you were talking a lot about the medical field. Amazon actually released a service called Medical Transcribe. It's exactly that, bringing context together with those techniques to be able to understand what humans are asking for.
Yeah,
and I think that's so critical to the success of this, isn't it? It's actually bringing that human context to AI, because ultimately it's just a bunch of algorithms running over some data. But if there's no one there to actually understand what you're trying to achieve with that and where you think you want to be, and I guess to Nirvana's point earlier, that's what makes the journey difficult in a lot of senses, because business traditionally does want that instant return on their investment, whereas some of these things do take months, sometimes years, to really see that strategic impact on the business. And so it's not necessarily something you can just, as easy it could potentially be to dive in now, it's not that easy to dive in, if that makes sense, because your business really wants to see some value back from that data and that investment.
It's great. So just that's a really good leeway to the next question. Rima, perhaps, what real business values are we seeing, or are you seeing your customers get out of AI deployment? Take us through some use cases, if you could.
Yeah, so I lead the healthcare, life sciences, and manufacturing business in the U.S. So I'm going to give you some use cases based on some of the work that we're doing with our customers. And in healthcare, we are seeing an explosion of leveraging AI across the board. So whether it is in medical imaging, using images for disease detection, or whether it's in an emergency room to triage which patients to actually take care of first, or whether it's in the payer space to look at call analysis, or virtual surgical assistants, or actually, just to give you an example, we just recently, during this pandemic, we collaborated with the National Institute of Health to develop a COVID CT diagnostic model so that we can quickly determine if someone has COVID from their CT scans. So those are some examples, but also what I think is really exciting is also what's happening in the genomics space and in the drug discovery space. So what we're seeing is companies use silico methods to actually focus on drug discovery, and also using AI for protein design and for screening the chemical libraries for compounds that would bind to a specific molecule. So it's really super exciting to see what's happening in the space, and actually it's so terrible that COVID happened, but the one good thing that came out of it is the urgency around coming up with new solutions. And I've seen so many customers across the board leveraging AI with urgency to be able to come up with new solutions.
Thank you, Rima.
And to add
Dan,
to that,
would you be...
and Barsha, on the COVID thing, I know you have to ask a question. You're gonna blame me here, but imagine 3 years ago you would go into a big retail store and tell them, "Hey, let's install cameras to count how many people are getting into your store and to see how separated they are in your store." They'll be like, "I don't need this now. I can put someone on the door that can count." Today, they're coming back to us as like, "We apologize for not listening to you 3 years ago. We need that right now. If you can deliver it today." So that's what Remo was talking about.
Yeah, actually, Hoseb, thank you for actually bringing that up, because actually that's one important use case. Also, having the monitors that check elevated temperature and all these different techniques using AI. So sorry, Adrian, you were going to say something.
And Adrian, you guys do that a lot, right? So you have use cases
Yeah.
in that area too.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to pick up on that whole thing around cameras, and even in your keynote, you talked about, autonomous cars. Well, autonomous cars certainly are the poster child. We see obviously, people like Elon Musk getting in the headlines quite a lot with the technology that Tesla is creating, and it certainly does help. Having all that sensory information there, and a customer certainly that we've worked with is Mobileye. So Mobileye, a lot of the technology that sits in a lot of modern cars today have things like advanced driving assistance and road experience management software. And so these products have a need to train not just one type of neural network, but multiple neural networks to be continually effective. And that's where we certainly see things like the cloud playing a part. Think about being able to train vast sets of data that is constantly changing. If you think about a road isn't always static. It has different objects on it, and it continually ages and times. So the need to continually train and doing that in parallel, doing that in the cloud is an awfully good way to use computing resources.
Exactly. Well, that's the whole beauty of the elasticity of the cloud too, is that as my requirements change on the fly, I can change my infrastructure stack on the fly. We no longer have this challenge where we bought something, we have to keep it for 5 years. Now I can go to my favorite cloud provider, buy my AI as a service almost with GPUs as a service, compute as a service, everything as a service. And suddenly when that need comes up and someone has to do something really urgently, it's not that much of a big deal. The infrastructure is no longer the blocker, which makes this so much cooler.
And it's been really interesting to see, speaking about industries here, Rima, I know you've had some experience in this as well, but, it's what's been really delightful to see is how these use cases grow inside an organization. Again, we talked about the poster child being autonomous cars, but if you think about automotive delivery and the services around that, there's a lot more where AI can play a part. Think about predictive maintenance, or improving workplace safety inside a factory, or visual inspection of the quality of components that are coming off a production line. These are all the different ways in which we see artificial intelligence and machine learning playing a part.
Well, awesome. So, we've talked about a lot of use cases and also cloud in that conversation as well. Touching on a couple of points that Hoseb and Nirvana both covered, regulation, right? Considering regulatory and privacy requirements that organizations have to abide by, how do customers go about making sure that they're not violating any of these requirements when considering AI solutions, right? Given that where the data sits to where it gets processed and inferences and all of that. Adrian, do you want to have a go at that first? Considerations of privacy and regulations when considering AI solutions.
Yeah, again, it's a lot of something that's captured a lot in the press these days. And, it's been interesting again making some references. We thought that the world was going to be very much like Terminators, overlooking everything that we do. But when you actually look at the reality, it's more like the Bicentennial Man, right? Machine learning has become, really the star of the show in today's environment. We're not at that cognitive or that human cognitive experience just yet. So being able to first of all gather that information, make sure that it is protected in such a way that we provide very fine-grained levels of control of access to that data, is exactly what a lot of cloud service providers are doing today to ensure that there's not just the accessibility, but the distribution of that data doesn't overstretch in different regions or boundaries, or certainly even organizational boundaries. So that's a really multi-layered approach.
So just to say something on the back of what you said, Adrian, in regards to regulation, and that is, if we embed compliance by design at the development stage of the products and have that in the forefront of our minds, I think that will make us more successful in moving forwards. And, again, that level of sophistication of AI is something that's critical. I call up the bank and half the time the AI is running me around in circles and, it's probably my dodgy accent. But really, I think what's key is to have that mindset at the beginning, at the development stage, and not stifle creativity, because AI and the innovations that we're having in technology is something that needs to blossom and bloom, so we can't just stifle that creativity as well.
Yeah, and actually one thing that I want to mention, okay, go ahead.
Go ahead, Rima, go ahead.
Okay, I was just going to say that different parts of AI are at different maturity levels. For example, image processing is very different than natural language understanding. Natural language understanding is a very hard problem, and we've actually made transformational changes in the last year, like with BERT and the new advances. Today we have actually something called Megatron that is much more advanced than what we had even like 6 months ago. But natural language understanding is still one of the hardest problems versus other areas that were much more mature.
Nirvana, I think to your point, there's also this misconception that AI is being misused as a term. A lot of the time I get a call from our account team saying, hey, I want you to come and talk to my customer about AI. So my first question would be, what is the customer doing in AI? So maybe the bank you're calling is using a chatbot that was developed 10 years ago based on rule-based, which only understands 10 sentences. Whereas what we are doing today with the natural language processing and natural language understanding of more deeper conversations, like, for example, when Google CEO showcased his calling the haircut salon without them hearing his voice for the first time and going through the whole process of scheduling the haircut appointment to the end with the machine.
The issue is also not just natural language understanding of that natural language processing. It's the actual language barrier between the line of business and the IT side of the tech side of the business. So there has to be an understanding on both sides. And as the technology is advancing, it's very key for, if the line of business to understand the challenges tech faces and vice versa, and what the use cases are and what are the business challenges that it needs to be applied to, and not just kind of be in their own silos. So that's all I wanted to say on that.
Yeah, actually, today, what companies are doing, they're not just taking, like, for example, if you take a model that's trained on Wikipedia, you really can't have it, you can't leverage it in a pharmaceutical setting, for example, or in a financial services setting. What you need to do is you need to take that model and apply transfer learning to it and apply the words and vocabulary of that specific industry so that it could learn that vocabulary. So you're very right. You can't just pick up a model. You have to then train it on that business vocabulary so that it becomes effective.
And Nirvana, I was going to ask you, you spend a lot of time in the financial services space. We talked about, chatbots and personalization, but, coming back to this language of the industry, I was actually reading that, things here in the US, fraud, for example, costs the economy somewhere between $57 and $109 billion in the last couple of years. Where else are you actually seeing the financial services companies investing in artificial intelligence?
Oh, across the board, across the entire business, compliance department, yes, fraud and anti-money laundering are huge issues, but compliance monitoring. So again, going back to the example of COVID, the infrastructure of organizations has been extended outside of the brick and mortar buildings into people's homes, right? So for compliance monitoring and checks and what have you, how do you know what your trader is doing and if they're not, fat fingering trades, and who's monitoring them and how you're doing that? So that becomes an increasing challenge. So there's all those elements. And, just back to Rima's point earlier, COVID has been a real accelerator in us embracing this change and adopting AI. And, I feel sorry in some instances because really, if that data isn't available, like we've seen in the medical sector, it presents challenges, so you need to have data availability. And sometimes these regulations hinder rather than help because, as you see in healthcare, you can't even access database to database because of the HIPAA and FDA rules, and it's the same with financial services. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so actually one point that I wanted to make here is that what we're seeing to get around this problem with data locality, and you can't move data from one location, but you need to generalize the models, you need to leverage the data across the board. We're seeing more and more companies leveraging federated learning. With federated learning, you could keep the data local, you could train locally, but then you can send the weights up to the main server. And so this way you're not moving the data, but you're leveraging the intelligence from all the different locations. And actually, we did that with a number of hospitals across the world, specifically around COVID, to make sure that we can learn from what we're seeing across the world, but not send patient data, not have it leave that local location. So great point. And to your point, like COVID has actually accelerated a lot of things. One of the things that did accelerate is making sure we find ways to leverage data globally, yet keep the data locally.
A lot of the
Perfect.
challenges with financial services is that they actually created a lot of data lakes, right? And they became data swamps. So your approach in terms of the federated way, I think, is what firms are doing more and more now, even in financial services. So that's a great thing.
Right, great conversation, everyone. I'm just a bit mindful of time, so we're hitting top of the hour. I know, the question that you posed, Nirvana, I think we've explored that to depth in all the verticals that we talked about, which is fantastic. I will ask the panelists for their one last thought. Keep it short for our audience. What is your one last thought from this conversation, or for anybody listening to this conversation and on an AI journey? Perhaps Rima, I'll start with you.
Yeah, what I would tell the audience is get started, have a plan, make sure you start out with important business questions that you need to answer, because if they're important business questions, everyone across the board is going to help you get the data, embed those models and processes into the workflows across the organization. So start with something important, because then it will be worth the time and the effort. And don't give up. Continue iterating and experimenting to get to the right models and then embed them across your organization, and start with things that you can actually show success quickly, so that you can build on it. And once you show success, then you can get more people on board and start experimenting with new problems and new business issues that you need to move forward.
Perfect. Thanks, Rima. Over to you, Dan.
Yeah, I'd like to echo what Rima was saying. It's really important to have a clear strategy in mind when you start out on this, but I think it's also important to understand that sometimes some of those wins are going to be tactical by nature, but what's going to build you the capital inside the business to get closer to that outcome that you're after for the business. And ultimately, I think that's where the real value in the journey lies.
Mm-hmm.
Adrian, last but not least.
Well, I'm going to pick up from where Hoseb left off. Break free from those data silos. Make sure that layer is really solid, and look at using managed services all the way through the delivery chain of artificial intelligence. There's a great opportunity to modernize a lot of those data warehouses and bring in all those different types of data sources that I was talking about before. And by just using some of these modern application approaches and the different purpose-built technologies, particularly that the cloud brings, I think you'll be able to sustain, not just build those insights using artificial intelligence.
Thank you to our amazing keynote speakers and our guest panelists for a very insightful discussion. I hope our audience enjoyed this conversation today, and we welcome you to reach out to any of us with any of your queries or questions, if you want to. So stay safe and speak soon again.